Hello and welcome. First responders to an accident, such as police, fire, ambulance and emergency workers, serve our community, providing timely and considered response. They are there to save lives, prevent further harm and protect property, considering their own safety too, of course. Being called out to vehicle accidents is a sad reality for these people. Knowing what to expect and how to react makes a difference between people dying or surviving. Having the training and the equipment on hand is vital. Accidents involving vehicles with internal combustion engines present problems with volatile, flammable fuel, the hot engine, scalding steam from radiators, explosive airbags, acid batteries, oil pollution, and structures needing to be cut to extricate those trapped. All first responders would have experienced this scenario. Vehicles powered by electricity present a different challenge. Their energy is not stored as flammable petrol or diesel. Electric vehicles are 10 times less likely to catch fire than a conventional vehicle. However, the danger of electric shock is real. Knowing how electric vehicles are constructed means there will be no nasty surprises. For instance, the Tesla safety cage built around the cabin is of a high-grade steel that may be difficult for the jaws of life to cut. Recognizing this, Tesla has produced a comprehensive guide to educate first responders in how to treat a scene where their cars are involved in an accident. I urge all first responders to look at their website, which is comprehensive information relating to the Tesla Model S, Model X, Model 3, Model Y and Tesla Roadster. There is also information on the Tesla energy storage system that might be found in home or businesses. The various owners' manuals are found here too. Tesla has produced training videos such as electric vehicle safety training and advanced extrication to give you the knowledge to make a difference. Here are those videos which I encourage you to watch. Thank you.
The fire service responds to over 200,000 vehicle fires annually, just in the U.S. alone. With the increased popularity of hybrid and electric vehicles, your chances of encountering a high-voltage battery in a vehicle fire increase every day. In this short training video, we've teamed up with CAL FIRE, the NFPA, and Advanced Extrication to bring you best practice when responding to electric and hybrid vehicle fires. One important step when responding to an incident involving a hybrid or electric vehicle fire is to identify the vehicle. This identification process starts with the reporting party, but it may be that we arrive at the incident and then have to identify the vehicle from there. This can be difficult when the vehicle is involved in fire. After the knockdown of the vehicle, which will be handled in the same way as a conventional vehicle, we can take the necessary steps to identify the vehicle. The formal identification for a hybrid or electric vehicle is simply the badging and branding on the outside of the vehicle. We can look on the inside of the vehicle for our informal identification, possibly in the engine compartment, trunk, luggage compartment, or just throughout the vehicle. More information on identifying high-voltage vehicles can be found by visiting Advanced Extrication's website or the NFPA's EV Safety Training Program. Once we've identified that we're fighting fire at a hybrid or EV, we need to find the battery. Locating the battery is important for two reasons. First of all, we need to make sure that we're able to cool the battery if it's been exposed to heat. This will require locating the battery in the vehicle. We also want to identify the location of the battery so that we avoid it during our overhaul operations. We never want to cut or crush a high voltage battery or open it up to extinguish it. The personal protective equipment required for responding to a hybrid or electric vehicle fire remains the same as a conventional vehicle. SCBA and full structural PPE are adequate protection for responding to vehicle fires involving high voltage batteries. As we mentioned earlier, it's important to apply our water directly to the high voltage battery in order to effectively cool it. It's not always possible to get direct access to the battery. In most hybrid vehicles, we can lift up the luggage compartment or trunk area to apply water to the battery. If that area has been involved in fire, much of the battery coverings may be melted away, giving you better access. On vehicles with floor pan mounted batteries, we may need to lift the vehicle slightly in order to get water onto the floor pan battery. If conducting that technician level operation, be sure that your personnel are trained and equipped for the task and that care is taken to not interact with that battery during your lifting assignment. To evaluate if a battery has been exposed to heat or if it's involved in thermal runaway, we can simply observe the battery and listen to the battery. If we see smoke or steam coming off the battery or we hear any popping noises from the battery, this indicates that the battery is involved in a thermal event. We can also use our thermal imaging cameras to evaluate the battery's temperature. If the battery requires cooling, we simply use water to cool the battery. Directing your hose stream at the battery in one location that's been heated for a period of time and then moving on to another location in the battery was found to be best practice rather than sweeping the battery with your hose stream. How the heat and fire spread through a battery varies dramatically. The variables are based on how the manufacturer has put the battery together, the charge of the battery, and where the battery was exposed to the heat. Water has been identified as the best extinguishing agent and cooling agent for lithium-ion high-voltage battery fires. Research and case studies have proven that it can take between 500 and 8,000 gallons of water. Later, we'll talk about actively cooling the battery, and we'll cover best practice for application of water onto the high-voltage battery. But keep in mind, suffocating agents such as foam and dry chemical are going to be ineffective in cooling your high-voltage battery. In addition to cooling the battery with the application of water on the case, we can also effectively cool the battery by applying water inside the battery. This is only possible when a vent or other natural opening has occurred, like in the case of a collision ripping the battery partially open. If we have the opportunity to apply the water inside the battery, this is the most effective way to cool it. Keep in mind, at no point during the incident should you attempt to open up the battery to apply water to the inside. It's only conducted when we can do it through a vent or an opening created by the accident. Cooling the battery is very simple. A long, continuous stream of water applied to the case of the battery is the most effective way to reduce the temperature within the battery and limit thermal runaway. The application of our hose stream should be placed on an area of the battery where heat is determined. We can determine where the battery is heated with our thermal imaging camera or visually watching the battery for areas where smoke and steam are venting from the battery. That application of water should take place for an extended period of time and not be interrupted. Once we see visually that the battery has been cooled, either determined by no more smoke or steam coming off the battery or a clean reading with our thermal imaging camera, we can stop our cooling efforts. At this point, monitoring the battery again for smoke or steam coming from the battery or with our thermal imaging camera for 45 minutes before we release the vehicle to second responders is appropriate. If at any point during our waiting period we see any indication of heat buildup, water should be again applied to the battery. Typically, when interacting with a hybrid or EV at a roadway incident, we're going to take action to shut down the high voltage and isolate it to the battery. We do this through the first responder cut loops or the high voltage disconnects within the vehicle. We also disconnect the 12-volt battery and often turn off the ignition to perform this operation. With high voltage vehicle firefighting, that operation remains the same, although you may not be able to access some of these components due to the damage created by the fire. We're going to use any system that's still intact to perform that operation, but keep in mind it may not be possible due to the fire damage to the vehicle. In most situations, the vehicle will have performed this operation on its own due to the high voltage relays in the battery. This means that we can operate as if we're at a conventional vehicle with the exception of interacting with those high voltage components.
Let's take a look at our Tesla Model S training and research burn conducted in March of 2019. A 400,000 BTU torch was directed through an opening in the battery, and over 3,000 degrees was applied directly on a module. The torch was left in place until fire had spread beyond the battery into the front trunk and wheel well of the vehicle. This took approximately 13 minutes. In this test, the heat applied resulted in thermal runaway to 2 modules. Firefighters were then directed to extinguish the fire and cool the battery. Knockdown was found to be a simple operation, and the crew was directed to lift the vehicle in order to direct the hose streams at the floor pan battery. At this point, the battery was checked with a Scott thermal imaging camera. Cooling operations began, and water was directed at the hottest area of the battery for nearly 10 minutes. The battery case was then checked again after the cooling operation had been stopped for 5 minutes. This time was given to allow any potential heat to transfer from the cells of the battery onto the battery case. The battery case was found to be over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and cooling operations began again. Cooling continued for another 8 minutes until the battery was found to be sufficiently cooled. The vehicle was monitored for 45 minutes and no signs of thermal runaway were detected. The entire operation used approximately 4,000 gallons of water, and the vehicle did not reignite at any point after the testing.
Once the battery temperature has been reduced to approximately the outside ambient temperature, and that temperature has been maintained without the application of water, again for 45 minutes, we're ready to release the vehicle to second responders, including law enforcement and tow. It's our responsibility to help educate our second responders on the proper storage and transport of the vehicle. The vehicle should be kept 50 feet away from any exposures wherever it's being stored. This is because there's always a chance of reignition days or hours after the incident. In addition, we can request that our second responders prop the vehicle up and position it in a way where any water that has gathered inside the battery drains out of one of the openings. In this short video, we covered the various operational considerations and tactics required to effectively and efficiently mitigate fires at vehicles equipped with high voltage batteries. The process for extinguishing a high voltage vehicle fire is no more challenging than that of a typical conventional vehicle. Remember to establish your water supply early and expect a longer commitment time. Cooling the battery directly with water is the appropriate extinguishing agent. Hey, I'm Brock Archer with Advanced Extrication.
And I'm Jim Bolton, captain with the Reno Fire Department.
Today we're in Fremont, California. We're at Fire Station 7. We're going to take a close look at the Tesla Model 3. It's a unique vehicle and it's electrically very different than Model S and Model X. I'm going to talk with you about the high voltage components within Model 3 and how to safely interact with them during your extrication assignment. I'll also talk with you about the SRS and airbag components.
Then I'm going to take you out to the training center where we're going to discuss the construction features of the Model 3, and then we're going to demonstrate a full side removal and a dash displacement.
Let's start by taking a look at the various high voltage components and their location in the Tesla Model 3. Okay, let's talk about the high voltage components in Model 3. It's important that we understand where the high voltage components are located so that we can avoid them during our extrication assignment. Tesla Model 3 is very different than the Model S and the Model X. We'll talk about those differences as we go through this high voltage component section. But let's start with the floor pan battery. The Model 3 has a full floor pan mounted high voltage battery. This battery is 400 volts. At no time during our extrication assignment should we breach the high voltage battery with our tools. This battery extends from axle to axle and rocker to rocker. Just like Model S and Model X, pushing on the floor pan of Model 3 is off limits. This can result in the floor pan collapsing and your tool interacting with that 400 volt battery. The seat mounts, however, where the seat mounts to the floor pan is a good push point for us, as long as we monitor it as we're pushing there. Also, the rocker channels or rocker panels on the side of Model 3 are good push points, as there's no high voltage cables in the rockers, unlike Model S and Model X. Okay, let's look at the location of all of the high voltage components on Model 3. It's been made pretty simple for us as rescuers by Tesla. All of the high voltage components on Model 3 are isolated to almost the center of the vehicle. The drive unit for the rear wheels is located between the rear wheels of the vehicle. The DC to DC converter, inverter, and charge controller are all integrated into the rear of the battery. That's found underneath the rear seat of the vehicle. The high voltage cables run up the center of the vehicle above the floor pan mounted battery. Again, the high voltage battery encompasses the entire underbody of the vehicle under the floor pan, axle to axle and rocker to rocker. Then in the center console area, we have the heater, the cabin heater for Model 3. This is located in the center console area of the vehicle. In front of the bulkhead, slightly towards the passenger side of the vehicle, is the AC compressor for Model 3. So you can see most of the high voltage component locations will not interfere with typical extrication assignments. Rescuers should avoid the floor pan of the vehicle for pushing off of, and in the center console area, the high voltage cables and the heater unit itself make the center console area off limits for pushing on the transverse bar or dash reinforcement bar in that area. Otherwise, Model 3 presents very little risks to rescuers with typical extrication assignments. Before we take action on an extrication assignment, we need to identify what type of a vehicle we've responded to. Are we dealing with a hybrid vehicle, electric vehicle, a propane, a natural gas vehicle, or just an internal combustion engine vehicle? It's important so that our course of action through our extrication assignment is safe and effective. So identifying the Tesla Model 3 is a little bit different than other Teslas. On Model S and Model X, you see Model X or Model S written on the back of the vehicle. For Tesla with Model 3, they've decided to use the SAE standard that allows them to use the unique name Tesla as the identifier to let us know that we're dealing with an electric vehicle. So what we know is that anytime we see Tesla on the back of a vehicle, that we're going to be dealing with a high voltage vehicle. Model 3 doesn't have Model 3 written on the trunk lid or the back of the vehicle. Simply, the Tesla logo is how we're going to identify it formally as a high voltage vehicle. We'll also see the Tesla logo on the hood, on the front trunk of the vehicle, so we can identify it that way as well. Our informal identification remains the same for Model 3. We may see orange high voltage cable, or we may see other high voltage components in the vehicle. make sure that we identify our vehicles as electric before we take action on them, so that we can then go through the proper shutdown procedures to isolate that high voltage to the high voltage battery. Now let's take a quick look at the charging port on Model 3. It's located here, hidden in the taillight on the driver's side of the vehicle. The charging port opens automatically with a charging handle when you approach the vehicle and push the button. But it can also be opened manually by simply lifting up on the corner here. And again, there's the charging port for Model 3. This area is not high voltage unless the vehicle is plugged into a charger. The high voltage cabling for the charge port runs in the quarter panel of the vehicle here and then down through the side of the rear seats to the charge controllers. Okay, let's talk about the openings on Model 3. We have the trunk, hatchback area, the front trunk or the hood area, and then we've got all four doors. We'll start here at the trunk lid at the hatchback. To open the hatchback, you've got to have 12-volt power. There is an electric switch under the Tesla logo here that we can utilize to open up the trunk lid. If 12-volt power isn't present, this switch isn't going to operate. There's no mechanical linkage between a handle and the latch. We can, however, open this with the screen on Model 3. The LCD screen in the front of the vehicle will also open this, but it may be tricky for us to navigate at an extrication assignment. The occupant of the vehicle may also have an app installed where they can open the trunk with their phone. So if the occupant is conscious and able to help you with that, that may be another option for opening it. But if 12-volt power is shut down on the vehicle, we're going to have to force entry into the trunk lid. That being said, there is a small cable behind the interior of the trunk that can be pulled to open the trunk lid, but that's going to be tough to access at your assignment. The doors on Model 3 are similar to Model S and Model X in the way that the latches are electrically operated, but the handles are different. On Model 3, it's a mechanical handle, meaning pushing on the back of the handle will present the grip of the handle, and then we can open the door with the handle. It looks like this. Although the door handle does present itself like a mechanical handle, the latch itself is electrically operated in Model 3. This means that if 12-volt power is shut down to the vehicle, the electric latches are not going to function. In this situation, on the front doors, we need to reach inside and use the mechanical linkage-operated handle on the inside of the doors. On the rear doors, there is no handle on the inside of the doors. So on the rear doors, we're going to have to force entry if 12-volt power has been disconnected. The only other option on the rear doors would be to take the interior off the doors and use the small cable to pop the doors open. There is a manufacturing cable inside the rear doors that can be pulled on to activate the latch mechanically. Otherwise, if 12-volt power is disconnected, we're going to need to force entry or use the inside latches on the front doors. Gaining access to Model 3 is different than other vehicles, even for the occupant. The occupant of Model 3 needs to use a key card for Model 3. This key card gets access to the vehicle by placing it on the B-pillar in the door sill area. Now, the occupant can also use an app on their phone to conduct this operation. Once they're in the vehicle, to put the vehicle in a ready-to-drive position, they can still utilize the app, or they can use the key card by placing it in the center console, like so. For a rescuer, locating the key card, just like proximity keys, isn't important. If one is found, we can remove it from the area of the center console, but we don't need to hunt for one at an incident.
Now let's take a quick look at the SRS and airbag components within the Tesla Model 3. Model 3 is equipped with two frontal airbags, one for the front passenger and one for the driver of the vehicle. Model 3 is also equipped with two knee airbags, again one for the driver and one for the front passenger. Curtain airbags protect both the front and the rear occupants. Both the front driver and the front passenger have side airbags built into the seats of Model 3. The SRS components are pretty straightforward in Model 3. There are two seatbelt pretensioners, one for the driver and one for the front passenger. These pretensioners are located on the side of the seat of Model 3. The inflation cylinders for the curtain airbags are located in the roof rail, just above the C-pillar. Model 3 does have inflation cylinders like most vehicles for the front driver's airbag and both knee airbags. Rescuers should avoid cutting or crushing any uninflated airbag for this reason. Shutdown procedures for the Tesla Model 3 are quite simple. First, we want to stabilize the vehicle. Make sure that we chock the wheels on the outside to prevent vehicle movement. This is important because electric and hybrid vehicles move silently.
Before we take action at any extrication assignment, cutting or crushing on a high voltage vehicle, we need to perform high voltage shutdown. Remember that even after high voltage shutdown is accomplished, high voltage energy is still present in the high voltage battery. In addition, after high voltage shutdown has taken place, we should still avoid cutting or crushing any high voltage components or cabling. In Model 3, high voltage shutdown is quite simple. The cowling cover in front of the windshield is removed to reveal the first responder cut loop. This cut loop is easily identified by the cut loop tag. This loop is cut twice to avoid reconnection. This will shut down the high voltage components outside of the high voltage battery. In addition to high voltage shutdown, of course, we need to perform 12-volt shutdown. 12-volt shutdown is performed with the same operation, removing the cowling and then exposing the 12-volt battery. The negative terminal is then double cut again to prevent reconnection. Remember, high voltage is always present in the high voltage battery, and even after high voltage shutdown, no high voltage components should ever be cut or crushed on any hybrid or electric vehicle.
For more information on the shutdown procedures for Tesla Model 3, take a look at the Model 3 Emergency Response Guide.
We're at the Fremont Fire Department training facility where we're going to discuss the construction features of the Tesla Model 3 and then demonstrate techniques for doing a dash displacement and sidewall removal. Unlike the Model S and X, the Tesla Model 3 is constructed primarily out of steel. There are a few features that are constructed out of aluminum. Those features are the door panels, the hood, and the crumple zones in the front of the vehicle. It's important for us to understand the differences between aluminum and steel and how aluminum reacts when we apply the extrication tools to an evolution. Now we're going to discuss the construction features of the bulkhead A-post assembly. The Tesla Model 3 has some reinforcement brackets located down in the lower portion of the A-post behind the wheel well that give it superior reinforcing strength. If we're given the assignment to do a dash displacement, we're recommending that you cut above those braces, somewhere from here to here. This is a little higher than what we typically have done. The B-post is constructed of dual-phase steel. This high-strength steel should not cause any challenges for our late model cutters, given the thickness of the metal. Furthermore, that same steel is down the A-post and encompasses the area around the windshield. Now we're going to talk about the rocker sill to floor pan assembly. The rocker sill is a very robust feature of the car, which is a great place to use as a push point when we're going to displace the dash. There are no high voltage wires that run through the rocker sill assembly. That makes it safe for us to place the tools there. The floor pan, however, has the battery underneath of it, and that is not a location where we want you to place any portion of a power tool to perform an evolution. The seat post attachment is an acceptable location to place a tool as a purchase point if it's monitored closely. Now we're going to bring the crew in and demonstrate a dash displacement and total sidewall removal. Now that the vehicle has been stabilized, the 12-volt system has been isolated and the high voltage system has been isolated to the battery, the guys are going to come in and do a dash displacement evolution. We hope that these demonstrations we've shown you has given you a solid foundation when you're challenged by an auto extrication involving a Tesla Model 3.
Remember that identification is the first step in maintaining safety for yourself and the occupants involved in the collision. We covered the high voltage components and their location, and we talked about shutting down the high voltage and isolating it to the high voltage battery. We also covered the SRS components and the airbags in Model 3. We hope that this information will be a foundation for maintaining safety and effective extrication at your assignments. We want to thank Tesla for supporting this training with the vehicles and the information needed for our development. We also